Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new here. Each week, I take a couple of minutes and I talk about our weekly newsletter. Today, I'm going to be talking about the December 18th, 2025 newsletter. This is our penultimate newsletter of 2025. I will be taking a break next week, or this week rather, for Christmas Eve, and then we will be back on December 31st with the end of year 2025 trends recap of the newsletter. So if you haven't listened to one of these discussions before, I am not reading the newsletter from start to finish. You are fully capable of doing that yourself. However, I have heard from a lot of people that you don't necessarily have space or capacity for yet another newsletter in your inbox. And I've also heard from people that they want more context as to why I included specific articles, why I think certain news stories are important or relevant. So we're going to be diving into the newsletter with a little bit of that context. So let's get started. You can click directly on the newsletter down in the description box below. Please consider subscribing to the newsletter. You can get this in your inbox every Wednesday. We did move the newsletter to Wednesday earlier this year because honestly, Friday afternoons is not a good time for a newsletter. The beginning of each newsletter, I start out with a little bit of an opinion piece. And the headline for this particular week's newsletter is "Don't Rely on Others to Do Your Work." This headline comes from a couple of different things that came into play for me recently. And it also circles back to a manager boss I had almost 10 years ago after the organization I was working for. They let the rec director go, and they actually decided to take the consultant who was helping the rec department, and they asked her to take on a 4 or 6 month term placement while they went through the cycle of advertising for the position, updating the job description, conducting recruitment. They wanted to make sure that the organization did a better job than they had, because the rec manager had only been in the role for 4 or 5 months and wasn't a good fit for the organization. So the tie-in to the newsletter is that particular consultant became my boss for half a year, and she had so many good strategies that I have continued to use in my day-to-day work as well as coaching clients. And this particular title harkens back to something I learned from her, as well as something that I have seen a lot recently when it comes to span of control, roles and responsibilities, and who is the ultimate owner of a decision. So, not relying on others to do your work doesn't mean that we cannot trust other departments. We cannot trust colleagues or team members to do their jobs. It is about looking at holistically 360 degrees the operation, for example, of an aquatic facility, which most of us are doing, and how different departments or different work areas work together or not. So one of the examples I gave was a kickoff project that I had just this past week when I was in Banff. And this is a particular project. It is a very large multi-million dollar renovation. I'm not going to name the site, but there is a lot of people involved in this project who have aspects of pool operations in their portfolio. And that did not initially come to mind with my client. I met with the facilities director, and the facilities director is thinking, well, I'm in charge of pool operations. I'm in charge of maintenance staff, water testing, chemical delivery, cleaning, draining, scrubbing. That makes sense. That's pretty standard. But when we start to look at how this particular aquatic facility is going to be used by the clientele, as well as intersecting departments such as food and beverage, because there's a smoothie bar, such as housekeeping, because maintenance doesn't direct the cleaning, in terms of other staff who are going to be in the area, in terms of amenity attendants, spa attendants, treatment professionals. Then when we look at the whole organization, there's a lot of people who have a stake in the operation of the aquatics facility. And so the example I gave in the newsletter is, if a customer drops a smoothie on the pool deck, whose responsibility will it be? And so that is one of the threads that I pull on in this newsletter, is it's not about not collaborating, it's not about not being a team, but who is the ultimate owner of that decision, and then who has to be consulted in terms of the information or collaboration piece in terms of departments. So I know that's a little bit more theoretical, and often I do really try to make the op ed a little bit more actionable. But this was really a call to action just to give that awareness piece that sometimes we are relying too much on our colleagues or other departments to do the job that we are supposed to do. If we are in charge of operating the aquatic facility, if we're the final person, the director, what have you, we have ultimate control and responsibility if there's a complaint, if there's an incident, if there's a claim of negligence. So then how do we need to clearly delineate scope, roles and responsibilities, and job titles and job tasks with other departments if ultimately you are going to be responsible for the outcome? So, for example, if you're going to be fired because of an issue in the pool area because you are the pool manager or the facilities director, then there needs to be some direction and control and identification of span of control with these other departments. So that's basically what I started out our December 18th newsletter talking about. Further down in the newsletter, I did have some basic housekeeping items that we have now concluded our last Pool and Hot Tub Alliance certified pool operator class of 2025. I'm now on a 6-week break until late January 2026. Registration is open and ongoing. I've been pleasantly surprised by the number of people who've had a little bit of money left in 2025 to be able to go ahead and pre-register for 2026. Given the state of the economy and the US dollar, I thought everybody was out of money, but there have been a few clients who've gone ahead and registered already for January and February. If you are somebody who's waiting for your budget to be handed over to you effective, back to work January 5th or 6th, I would strongly encourage you to get your ducks in a row, chat with your team about availability and schedule, and please make sure to register as soon as you reasonably can that first week back to work or that second week back to work in January, because we don't want to have any disappointment. But a lot of people have the same idea of registering for CPO when they get back to the office after Christmas. And historically, we have had a few pretty full, if not sold out, January CPO classes. If you subscribe to our newsletter, then you know that the second half of the newsletter is going to include all of the news articles that I've read throughout the week and which ones I think are worth your time in terms of awareness, education, or importance. I always try and balance the articles so that they're not just water safety, but depending on the week, depending on the time of the year, and just what's happening in the world, you will definitely see more of a bent to water safety in this particular newsletter than others. The first article I shared was regarding a teenager who drowned in a quarry. This is particularly interesting to me because until I interviewed Becky Ramsey last year from Doing It for Dylan, I was not fully aware of the scale of quarry drowning fatalities internationally, as well as in Canada and the US. This is one of those topics like flooded cars that we as water safety professionals in a pool environment, we do not fully know the scope of where these drowning fatalities happen out in the real world. And this needs to be a stronger point of education, in my personal opinion, teaching kids, youth, about the risks of jumping into water of unknown depth, unknown clarity. There have been a ton of fatalities. In the case of Doing It for Dylan, her son Dylan, it's believed he died from hypothermia due to the temperature of the water. But in a lot of these other incidences that I've shared in the newsletter throughout the last year, it is maybe a spinal injury, it's drowning because they're not strong swimmers. There's a lot of different circumstances at play, but it's not clear water and it's not easy for a rescue or recovery. Another article that I shared this week that I thought was really important is 2 years after the incident, a teacher has been disciplined by their education board for an incident where a student athlete drowned fatally during a unauthorized excursion. So it appears that the group of athletes, they went on a specific excursion, a day trip. This was not previously authorized by the school board, by the school. Specific safety parameters were not followed. And this is exactly the lack of water safety plan or lifeguard plan that we often see in these school place settings where they're leaving the school building, they're leaving the classroom. We saw this earlier this summer with the 6-year-old girl who drowned on a farm during a school outing. The school or the teachers were unaware of the body of water, the swimming pool, and the 6-year-old girl got separated from the group, apparently did not know how to swim, and drowned fatally in the pool on the property that her class was visiting. So I'm not suggesting we bubble wrap our kids and we never take them on school outings, but there does need to be a formal structure. The same way you can't just take a lifeguard and plant them anywhere that you want. There has to be a lifeguard system in place in terms of rescue equipment, backup support, emergency plan. There is a lot that goes into anticipating situations where water safety may become an issue. Also, this week, we had an update regarding the kayaker this summer who faked his death. I'm sure a lot of you remember this story. The man faked his death. The kayak was left abandoned on the edge of the lake, and he fled to be with his lover, his internet lover from Georgia. This was a really, really frustrating case for somebody like me to watch because I follow Bruce's Legacy. They are a nonprofit group founded by Keith Cormacan. He goes around the world to volunteer his time to search for decedents, like dead people's bodies, in the bottom of lakes, rivers. He uses a special sonar machine. He does this as a volunteer. It takes a lot of his time. He came to Alberta during the pandemic to search for a gentleman from Airdrie who's gone missing in Lake Minnewanka. His body was never found. He spent a week or two here scanning for the body. And so, to make a long story short, it was so frustrating for him. He posted about this on their Facebook page. I'll link to it in the description box below, as well as for somebody like me who followed this in live time to genuinely believe that this man had disappeared through an accident, to spend days looking for his body and then discover that he was alive and well overseas, that he had fled, he has faked his own death. And so there is restitution that he's now required to pay, but it's only $30,000 to cover law enforcement and search costs. And I know that is absolutely not enough because Keith had shared with me when he was visiting Alberta that the cost to haul his trailer, meals and gas, and he doesn't ask for a lot of compensation for the subsistence for him and his wife. They do this out of the goodness of their hearts because of his brother who drowned as a firefighter in the early 90s. But that a trip to Alberta was going to cost him, for example, roughly $10,000 to $15,000, if I recall correctly, to search for the man from Airdrie. So I can imagine that going to Wisconsin and searching for this kayaker, they also spent easily $10,000 or $15,000. And that $30,000 is not going to cover everyone's time and effort and energies that could have gone to other more deserving situations. It's really, really frustrating. I'll leave it at that. Further down, I shared a really awful story about a man in a wheelchair who was found drowned in a pool. I shared a story regarding Wild Waves theme park, which is closing permanently after 50 years. If anybody has any more information on this latter story, I would be curious to know if we've reached a point in that facility's operations, if it's just impossible to retrofit cost effectively. If you have taken the certified pool operator course or you've worked in the aquatic industry for a while, then you know there have been a lot of changes over the last 20, 30 years in terms of increases in water speed, flow rate, turnover rate, minimum filter area for sanitation, filtration. And so older aquatic facilities really struggle to keep up with heavy bather load, as well as modern safety requirements like the Virginia Graham Baker Pool and Spa Safety Act, single main drain versus double main drains. So I don't know exactly what's happened in this situation, but I wonder if we have reached a point where this particular facility just cannot get itself to an appropriate level of compliance to continue to operate in a way that does not put people at risk. I'm not making any allegations. I'm just speaking aloud and wondering if this is perhaps what has happened, especially in the current economic climate where everything is so expensive. And we've seen a significant increase in the cost of pool chemicals, labor, right? Lifeguard wages, food prices, utility prices, right? There's a lot of different things going on. I shared an update regarding a teenager who's going to be tried as an adult for allegedly throwing or pushing a victim who did not know how to swim into water, causing their death. I shared an update regarding the drowning fatality at the the fraternity at UC Berkeley. The parents are now suing the university for not doing enough to prevent these types of situations. I feel completely for the parents on that particular scenario, but I do not personally see, and I'm not a legal professional, I do not personally see how the university is going to be held liable when many of us know that fraternities and sororities at many campuses around North America, they're private land, they do their own thing, they're not necessarily sanctioned by the university. I personally think it's a bad idea to have had an in-ground pool at a fraternity in the first place. I'm sure that was a big draw for the members, but I don't see how the university themselves can be responsible for the behavior on private property if the fraternity is on private land, private members, private activities. We'll just have to see how this develops. These lawsuits obviously tend to take a couple of years to unspool unless there is a quick settlement or claim. I shared a data report from Australia. This was Royal Life Saving Australia. They have an excellent report that can be downloaded for free. It's called Occupational Violence and Aggression in Public Aquatic Facilities. So if you've been following the newsletter for probably the last 6 to 12 months, you have seen me share a spike in incidents, including aggression towards lifeguards. So literally fights, assault, abuse. I hesitate to say that this is just connected back to the pandemic, but generally speaking, we have seen an increasing flashpoint in customer service, not just in pools, but in all environments, the store, the mall, where people are just impatient and frustrated and very quick to escalate their feelings. And we've seen this happen in aquatics, and this has been very concerning to me as somebody who's adjacent to aquatics. I'm not on pool decks as a lifeguard very often anymore, and I know this hasn't come up so much yet in Canada, but certainly while I was at the World Water Park Show in Orlando, and then a few weeks later at the IAAPA Expo in Orlando, a number of the water park managers and directors shared that they are seeing increasing flashpoints as well at their high volume water parks. So this is something I'm very concerned is coming down the pipe and that we need to be aware of. And the reason I shared this data is so that those of you who need to make this a topic of in-service proactively before it's an issue, or for those of you who are looking to seek out funding or support from your organization for your aquatics department proactively, this is proof that this is a real problem if Life Saving Australia has a full report on this matter. I shared 2 procedural updates that happened a while ago in the provinces of British Columbia and Ontario. I only recently became aware of them, but I wanted to share them as paradigms that may be useful for you at your organization. The first one is called the Written Policy on Disconnecting from Work, and this was a law that was implemented in Ontario roughly in 2021, back when we were all dealing with lockdown in Canada during the COVID-19 pandemic, and there was a real blurring of schedules. You're working from home, you're taking care of your kids at home, you're homeschooling, you're doing your laundry, you're trying to work out at home. how can you effectively disconnect if there's not these clear boundaries between work hours and personal hours? And so I don't know to the degree how much this has been actively implemented or followed, or it's still an issue in Ontario, but I did want to share this example whereby it's important to have your own departmental or your own personal standards for disconnecting. I know at my last municipal aquatic job before I founded Lakeview Aquatic Consultants, the only thing I did, which worked for me, was I left my work phone downstairs by the front door. The volume was up on the ringer, but you could only hear it if it was ringing. So my staff knew you need to call if you have a real issue because I'm not picking up my phone and checking the notifications, the emails throughout the weekend. If you call, I will answer or call twice and I'll be sure to hear it from the second or third floor. But that was my own personal boundary for disconnecting. I don't know how effective it was, but that's what I did. I can only imagine how difficult it would be to have traditional employment where you can work from home periodically or there's expectations that you be available on the weekend. For me personally, I don't only really disconnect now as a consultant, as a self-employed person when I go on cruises. And that's one of the things I love about cruising. You are hard disconnecting unless you've paid for the internet package because there's no cell service out at sea. Literally none. People are always surprised by this, but there's literally no cell service. The other policy I shared, which is more recent from November, is the province of British Columbia, Western Canada, has recently eliminated the need for people, employees, to go to a doctor to get a sick note. I am not sure how much this is still an issue in the general workforce, but I know speaking for myself in aquatics, when I started as a lifeguard, you could not miss work without a note. I don't know to the extent that that was legal or ethical in the province where I lived, but I know that that is a behavior that has continued at a lot of pools, a lot of rec centers, a lot of traditional jobs up to the pandemic. Then during the pandemic, that had to be relaxed because it was unreasonable to expect people to go to the hospital and potentially be contract COVID if they had a cold, or to get people going to the doctor if they didn't need to. But I have been hearing anecdotally from different offices, departments, different roles and positions that some employers are now going back to being pretty strict and requiring doctor's note to prove even the most basic illnesses or absences. So I really do appreciate the province of British Columbia is trying to adjudicate this in a way that is reasonable by setting sort of a definition of casual illness versus prolonged illness. Do not look at the Facebook comments for these types of things because there's a lot of strong opinions about why this is a bad idea. And I'm ashamed to say that it comes from a lot of independent business owners who respectfully are pulling at straws for other issues that they haven't fixed. I would consider myself a very humane person. If you're really sick with the flu, like I had food poisoning earlier this year, I could not go to the hospital or could not go to my doctor's office to get a note. I was so sick. And I think there are times when it is reasonable not to require a doctor's note, to say nothing of the impact that we have on the Canadian medical system that's already strained. It's already overloaded with our immigration the last few years and large population relative to our medical workforce, that this is a struggle. And so I was happy to see this, although it is very controversial, not to require medical notes. The city of Regina was up in the news for having a wait list of 900 people on their swimming lesson registration page. Population for the city of Regina is 900 people. Does not strike me, honestly, as quite British Columbian cities that we've seen with wait lists allegedly of 10, 15, 20,000 people. City of Regina, as you'll recall, has currently started construction. I believe they already had the shovel ceremony for the new City of Regina, the massive aquatic center that's going to be built, 200 million Canadian dollars. So there is going to be more pool space coming. And the reason this project has been pushed forward is the city of Regina since the early 90s. And the current mayor made this a priority to recognize that pools are aging infrastructure. The population on the prairies has grown significantly in the last 15 to 20 years. And we can't keep putting off these expenditures when our residents and our ratepayers expect basic levels of service. Canada gets really cold, and we need activities like indoor swimming in the winter months for families to be able to participate in. Clearly, Kingston, Ontario, which is a small collegiate town with Queen's University, initially they only had an outdoor pool, and then about they built Artillery Park, which was a brand new aquatic center. But now, only 10, 15 years later, the town, the city is growing, growing, growing. That sprawl from Toronto all the way up the 401 to Ottawa. Kingston has become almost in some ways a bedroom community. I know somebody who lives about 30 minutes away from Kingston who commutes to Toronto. She doesn't take the train every day of the week. She works remotely and then would go in a couple times a month. But Kingston has seen huge growth. Meanwhile, Queen's University is experiencing huge financial challenges in terms of meeting their budget and infrastructure requirements. So all of this is a long way of saying, I think the City of Kingston Council has recognized, whoa, we might lose the Queen's University pool, and then all we have left is Artillery Park, which is one indoor pool, and then an outdoor pool that they are making efforts to cover with a permanent dome, something like a sprung structure or a retractable roof that could be used throughout the year. But only having one pool for a place with over, I believe Kingston is over 100,000 people now, they do need to think ahead. And so they are accelerating plans for a $100 million aquatic center. And for context, if you're looking at that number, $100 million, that's not a big pool necessarily. We are reaching the point where a baseline, basic community municipal pool is an easy, cool $30, $40 million, especially when we talk about having to lay utilities, water lines, if you're talking about paving a parking lot, if you're talking about landscaping a new piece of land where there's nothing else established. I'm not talking about adding a pool on to a hockey rink, a field house, a library. I'm talking about building a building from scratch on bare land. There is so much that goes into something like that. It's a cool $30, $40 million in the current economy, especially if we're talking about planning in 2026 to build in 2027 to open in 2028 or 2029, right? Costs are going to continue to rise. Inflation is not necessarily fully under control, and lending is definitely still a concern in terms of interest rates. The last couple of articles that I shared were just kind of a hodgepodge. I shared about a project of a new wave pool in California that is definitely controversial because of the drought in California. The author made a point to highlight water consumption at the wave pool relative to water consumption at a golf course, of which there are many golf courses, obviously, in California. I shared a study from Vietnam regarding reducing drowning fatalities. I shared a really cool holiday event from Wyoming, Cheyenne, Wyoming, called a Holiday Lights Splash Night. And then further down or on our Facebook page, I did also share a cool Swim with Santa event, which are some great ideas for next Christmas. If you're watching this video and thinking ahead for your strategic planning for the year for 2026. I never did much for Christmas, and I'm not suggesting you should do Christmas per se because it may not be culturally inclusive, but thinking about what kinds of special events can we do, because a lot of aquatic attendance, at least in Canada for indoor aquatic facilities, definitely drops off in the winter during hockey season and during December when like even at my gym, the attendance has dropped off substantially because people have parties to go to, concerts, plays, special events, they're visiting, they have family or friends from out of town, all of those sorts of things. Shared a call from Australia to include education, water safety education in the acculturation for migrants in Australia. shared a story that I've been following very closely regarding a drowning fatality where the guardian, the mom who was meant to be watching the child, was in a wheelchair. And I just have so many questions about this case. So I'm going to continue to showcase any tidbits that we get about that particular case in the newsletter because I'm just so perplexed. We don't get all the details, obviously, in public news coverage, but I have so many questions about what happened in that situation. Icelandic swimming pool culture has been added to the UNESCO, like the United Nations International Directory of Significant Cultural Movements or Heritage. So, Icelandic swimming culture has been added to the UNESCO World Heritage List. I shared an article regarding bone density and floating. And then the YMCA in the US is launching a campaign to remind people about the historic place and presence that they have in communities. Last but not least, I shared this really, really cute elf in the shelf lifeguard scenario from a few years ago that came up on my memories page, our memories page for the Lakeview Aquatic Consultants Facebook page. And there was another really cute one I saw on LinkedIn that I didn't share because this newsletter was already pretty long. It was a elf in the shelf doing CPR on a little Grinch. It was really cute. So maybe I'll share that next year. And then, as always, at the end of the newsletter, I do try and share some videos. And there has been a real deficit in videos recently just because of how busy I've been over the last couple of weeks. So I do appreciate your patience. Things have finally dropped off, knock on wood. I'm happy to be busy, but I'm also happy to be able to think clearly and have time to dedicate to projects that are important to me. So every year there's very basic things at the end of the year that need to happen, like, financial audits and QuickBooks, website updates, CPO PowerPoint updates, and then YouTube. And so I have tons and tons of footage that I have been taking from the World Water Park Association conference, IAPA Expo, some of my travel to Vancouver earlier this month. I'm still working on a video regarding my client facility opening, Everwild. That will be up shortly. And then I am headed out on a cruise in a couple weeks and a conference in a month. So it is coming fast and heavy, and I have not been able to keep up with the videos. I also have still been recording content as we go along. So I did a couple of recordings for my National Lifeguard series, one regarding spinal boarding, one regarding making fake vomit for in-service. I have a couple others lined up for communication as a lifeguard. So I have so many good ideas, and I appreciate your patience as I've been a lot slower than I anticipated getting them edited and uploaded onto YouTube. If you're enjoying these videos, whether it is the live discussion of the weekly newsletter, whether you're enjoying watching the archives of the Pool Aid webinars, whether you're appreciating the National Lifeguard series, whatever it is, I do appreciate if you like this video, consider sharing it with your team, your colleagues, or someone else in your department that you think could benefit from it. And please do consider subscribing because that shows the algorithm that this content is valuable when it's up against things like makeup tutorials and cooking videos and other vloggers whose engagement might be more interesting because of the content. This is more of a talking head video. So I'm always grateful, though, that you've made it to the end of this. Thank you so much for watching. Happy holidays. And I will see you back in 2 weeks for our 2025 end of year recap newsletter. Thanks so much for being here, and I will see you then. Bye for now.